Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Melissa Kane, and I am the Vice President of Big Tent USA, and I am thrilled to be moderating our conversation this evening with Tom Nichols and Juliette Kayyem about a lot of things, including the state of our democracy and our national security. The word that keeps coming to mind when I think about the state of the world and our place in it right now is sobering. But even as the actions of Trump's regime are more and more chaotic and concerning, Big Tent USA remains committed to defending our Constitution, our democratic values, and the rule of law. Our goal is to empower you with facts, guidance, and calls to action so that we can all become stronger, more effective advocates for what is right. As Cory Booker said last night after 25 hours on his feet, to interrupt and protest the inaction of our Congress during this crisis, this is a moral moment. It's not about right or left, it's about right or wrong. And the discussion Juliette and Tom are going to have tonight is going to have some really helpful insights into how we can respond, resist, protest. Tom Nichols, who is here somewhere, I don't see him up yet, is a staff writer. Hi, Tom. Is a staff writer at The Atlantic and a contributor to the Atlantic Daily newsletter. He's professor emeritus of national security affairs at the U.S. Naval War College, where he taught for 25 years, and an instructor at the Harvard Extension School. He served as a legislative aide in the Massachusetts State House and in the U.S. Senate for Senator John Hines from Pennsylvania. He writes about international security, nuclear weapons, Russia, and challenges to democracy in the United States and around the world, along with occasional contrarian views on popular culture. His books include The Death of Expertise, the campaign against established knowledge and why it matters, and Our Own Worst Enemy, The Assault from Within on Modern Democracy. Tom is also a 5-time undefeated Jeopardy champion and a proud cat dad. I hope we get to see Lily tonight. Juliette Kayyem served as President Obama's Assistant Secretary for Intergovernmental Affairs at the Department of Homeland Security. She's currently the faculty chair of the Homeland Security and Global Health Projects at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. She serves as CNN's senior national security analyst and has been described as CNN's go-to for disasters. She's also a contributing writer to The Atlantic and has a weekly security segment on NPR's Boston affiliate, WGBH. Her most recent book is The Devil Never Sleeps: Learning to Live in an Age of Disasters. She's a frequent speaker and advisor to major corporations and associations on national and homeland security, planning for crises, cybersecurity, and resiliency efforts. She was named one of Inc. magazine's top 100 female founders in 2019 and received the Lifetime Achievement Pinnacle Award from the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce in 2023. Juliette and Tom, welcome to the Big Tent.
Thank you.
So happy to have you here. I kind of want to say we interrupt all previously scheduled programming to bring you what the hell is going on tonight in these tariffs. But before I do that, I want to say I had a great time when we got together for our planning call a few weeks ago, and I'm hoping we can expand on some of the issues and themes that we talked about. Obviously, a lot has happened since then. And I wanted to say one of the things that stuck out to me is an important lens that Juliette identified, which is a great tool for all of us for weeding out the noise and chaos of what we are hearing every day in this country. And Juliette, tell me if I'm getting this right. We need to be able to identify the what is happening, the so what, why does it matter, and the now what are we going to do about this? Yeah. And that's kind of how I want to approach everything we talk about tonight. So I'm just going to start with a question and then I'll let you guys go. But, because of policy decisions being made by the Trump regime, ending USAID, changing our diplomatic philosophy, these tariffs, and unprovoked threats and aggression to our allies, it feels like we are in the midst of the destruction and total realignment of the world order. What does that mean for our national security? I mean, it terrifies me. I'm handing it off to both of you.
Tom, you go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think the problem is that most Americans don't realize that their standard of living depends on national security. They think they're two separate things. They think, what does it matter to us what happens in Asia or Europe or Australia or any place else? Because they don't fully grasp how the food on their table transits the world's waterways and skyways and roads. They don't understand that they live in a world where all the rules on the planet have pretty much been made in Washington and Brussels and in cooperation with our allies in Seoul and Tokyo and Canberra. They think it all just happens by magic and that it doesn't really matter. So, like if the Russians take over Europe, who cares? We'll still do business. We'll still get oil. We'll still get food. We can still travel. And none of that is true. And I hate to put it in those kind of grubby transactional terms because I think to be an American is to be committed to something noble and higher than ourselves. We are not just another country. I'm an American exceptionalist. We're not just another country in the big lineup of countries. We were founded on an idea. We have led the world through, planetary crises and World War II and the Cold War and all of these other things. But if you want to just make the case to your neighbor who doesn't care about any of that stuff, you have to explain to them that you don't want to live in a world where China makes the rules about everything. You just don't. You've never seen it. You've never experienced it. And you're not going to like it when it happens. But once it does, you're not going to be able to roll it back. And I think that's a big part of the problem is that we've just become, you'll hear me say this a lot tonight. And if you've read anything I've written, we've become an affluent, decadent, spoiled, bratty kind of nation that just really doesn't understand where all our good fortune and our well-being comes from.
And with that said, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Yeah.
It seems like we are used to our creature comforts.
Yes.
And I don't know how good we are at, going without, whereas in countries all around the world, I think that maybe have a bit of a stronger constitution. So I don't know.
I'm going to interject and say, we think going without is like the Wi-Fi went down.
Yeah. Right. It's like I say, it's like my idea of camping is a motel without cable. I don't like camping. Well, first of all, thank you. And Tom, not only am I a big fan, but we are friends. So it's so great to be baback here. And neighbors. And neighbors. We've all got like Rhode Island ties. And to Melissa, I don't know if I should start or end with this point, but like all of you, so don't think those of us who are experts, don't have our moments of sort of paralysis. And I took a little bit of time after Trump came in to just sort of figure out my meaningfulness in the various platforms I have, including teaching, which is not easy right now. So I thought the what, so what, now what is, it comes from disaster management. It's a training tool that we do for incident commanders because it's very hard to know what's going on. And you could also get distracted by things that don't matter. So the what is actually going on. So you don't have to respond to lots of, things that are said or even that are relevant. The so what is, how does it impact my equities? So all of you have different equities. You have the issue that compels you. And if you don't, choose one or two, because the human body cannot sustain outrage that's meaningful. You want outrage, but you need it to be meaningful and productive. And then the now what is, how do I, given that my equities are impacted, what tools can I use to help move in the direction that I need to? And it's going to be different for all of us. A lot of political engagement, everyone in the arena. That's everyone in the arena. And I am speaking as someone who's, at a university that it appears may not want to join it. So I want to talk about, just to your point is, and picking up on what Tom is talking about, the economic national security is what we're seeing. And I'm going to link a news story 2 weeks ago, which somehow, we don't talk about as much anymore, is trust. because what we're losing is not only, you know, a sense of consistency, a sense of anything. It is we are creating a global trust deficit of which we're on the losing side of. We're seeing that in a variety of ways internally, right? The misuse of Signal or even Gmail that that no one remembers the second part of the story, which is the Israelis clearly had given us information about where the Houthi terror leader was at that moment. The Israelis obviously knew that from the TikTok of what Hegseth had released, obviously knew that because there was someone near him who was supplying the Israelis information. That person is probably dead or in Israel now, depending on who it is, because it would be easily to determine who was nearby that. So that little thing, right? This Hegseth trying to act all cocky, and the lack of care on the Signal is now a trust deficit with Israel, but we see it also with our allies in terms of intelligence. The holding of students and visitors, tourists, right, is in violation of a well-worn SD travel program. Means that the trust that other countries have towards a system that they can tell their citizens makes sense to them means that a multi-billion-dollar tourism industry is about to be impacted big time. That's my next column in the Atlantic, and we'll do it. So national security leads to your beach motel or your restaurant that is going to have 80% fewer visitors this summer. And so thinking about trust in that way and the deficit that Trump is creating makes us not only arrogant and all the things that Tom said, but unreliable. And I think we used to be very reliable. And that is something that will take decades. It's not just Trump, it's to get rid of the Europeans. Everyone could dismiss Trump 1.0 as sort of an aberration. Trump 2.0 is proof to all of us, including the world, that this is an element that is strong within the United States. And until it loses big, they are going to worry it's going to come back again.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it seems to me that if we don't have their back, they're not going to have ours. And so, you know, obviously what happened today makes it even more complicated, but I'd sort of love to know, I was thinking, so what could the international community be doing to counter what's happening from the US? I don't know if that's even possible. If we look at various responses to this shift in American policy, if we look at how Mexico's handling it, if we look at how Canada's handling it, if we look at sort of the EU closing ranks, and then we look at a potential alliance, what is it, China, Japan, South Korea, what is the best tact? What is the most effective way, if there is a way? Forget us being backed, you know, in the order where we were, but what is the most effective way to hold Trump accountable, if that's even possible?
Not possible.
Not possible.
I mean, it's a very American question.
Yeah.
How do we hold Trump accountable? How can the international community? That's not how the international community works. You know, we don't run around holding each other accountable, especially when you're the biggest, you know, when you're the military superpower. What they do is they simply quietly make other arrangements. And then one of the things I learned early on when I started teaching about leadership and organizations and all that political science stuff is that great line that positions of power are positions of dependency. Where we're going to really notice it is not now. Nobody's going to hold Trump accountable. He's not going to get, if you have romantic notions about the international criminal, people keep sending me messages. Why can't Trump be arrested for this?
I know.
Right, Julia, you get those.
It's not a legal solution. If you think that any court case, you know, we were too dependent on that in Trump 1.0. I agree with you on that.
Yeah, it's like the guy who asked me at one point when I was talking about the United Nations, and I said, you know, the Americans can veto, and he said, does our Supreme Court know this? And I was like, yeah, they've been briefed. So, you know, the international legal and you know, practical ramifications, they'll fall on us later, because what these countries are going to quietly make other arrangements, and then when we need them, they're going to say, we had to, you know,
Move on.
we had to move on, right?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, look at the tariff numbers against Vietnam. If you want to create an alliance of Asian countries that are not dependent on China, you have just destroyed that. Because if you're Vietnam and you wake up, or I guess they're up now, and you see what just happened to them, 40%, I don't know what the number is. You've only got one market now, and that's China, and you're not getting that back. What can be done? I'm with Tom. I mean, Tom and I both spend a lot of time on cable news, and they'd always have their lawyers on, and the lawyers would say, this is the case. This is the
Right.
moment. This is
This
like,
time.
no, we've been saying that for 4 years. So I have a different theory of what can be done, and it's up to us, which is you gotta get this presidency below 40% popularity. It has to self-implode. And I say this as a moderate to conservative Democrat who has been on the wrong side of my party on issues like immigration, wrong side, the other side of my party on immigration. This is a collective effort, and he's already gone down 7 points each month. Why do you want under 40%? Because basically this is the Schumer theory. Those of you who are mad at Schumer, he has a theory, which is we're not, don't have them hate us, have them hate, disagree with him. There's an interesting new piece in the Atlantic, right? Like literally it was like the thing I had been thinking about, which is, we always talk about the autocracies and the autocrats who come out of democracies who succeed. We don't talk about the ones that fail. There's a list of those that have tried to do this.
Yeah.
Trump has been successful, and the thing that gets them is self-implosion. I can't explain.
This is John Chait's piece today,
yeah,
right?
this is John.
I was going to bring this up if you hadn't.
Yeah. I just was
which
like,
is why
that's
everyone should
exactly-
subscribe to the Atlantic.
Exactly. Exactly.
Good magazine.
I know.
Well played.
I have another bouquet of flowers here. Anyway, that's my point, which is it's on us, and then the world will see what's happening to him.
Yeah.
Right. The world looks at those poll numbers too, but then all of a sudden, then you'll get the wrinkles in the Republican Unified Front, and you'll get all sorts of other
All
things.
right. But to your point, there's a lot of ideas floating around in the ether about how to build a truly effective resistance movement. How do we pull off mass mobilizations? What are the strategies, whether it's a general strike or economic boycotts, that can be effective to challenge billionaires like tied to Trump and Musk.
Yeah.
So what can we take from models of these autocracies that failed on how to fight authoritarianism, like Brazil, like Poland? I mean, we had Ruth Ben-Ghiat with us last week, and she talked about the March of a Million Hearts, which basically talked about the ability to pull a resistance movement together that's built from a coalition of very broad perspectives and potentially different end goals, right? But the US isn't Poland. We're a very different sized federation of 50 states. How do you make that work in this country? What can you take?
Can everyone see me trying not to explode?
Okay, go for explode.
Because remember, Juliette, and we talked about this when we had our first talk, and when I hear how mounting a resistance and general strikes and mass mobilization, did no one learn anything from what happened in Wisconsin last night? All you have to do is show up. Just show up.
Right.
This is a friend of mine has a great line. He says, and he was kind of castigating all liberals, which I won't do here. But he said, there are so many people in this country who will do anything to stop autocracy except vote.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
It still works. It still works.
Elon Musk blew into town handing out $1 million checks, and his guy lost by 10 points in a swing state.
Yeah.
Not by
election.
a razor, 10 points.
Yeah.
What did Ben Wickler say? Democracy is
And
alive, kicking in the Badger state.
Yeah.
People
And
are voting.
Yeah. And I mean, that's what I totally agree with. So two things to how do you make that more likely? I mean, one is, I think that we're paralyzed by this word resistance as if it's a capital R. And I think we need to think of it as as sort of everyday resistance, the personal choices, the making, the people that you're convincing, the voting that you're doing, ladies, the running for office. I did it once. I lost spectacularly. Never do it again, but I did it once. The little R, and everyone's like, where are all the protests? I don't want to see them. They didn't work. I don't care. Like I want to. I mean, I want you to go out, but in fact, the fact there's not a big DC rally, I like these local individual ones. This is how it's going to work. It's going to be resistance with a little R. Right. So don't look for the resistance master, right? Where am I going? It is every, and so I have a line which is like everybody in the arena, like every way that you can. But the second piece, you know, sort of adding to this is I'm a Democrat, we failed in narrating the story of why government matters in people's lives. That's a story that that we didn't have a good spokesperson with Biden. He couldn't do it. Harris, I think, was for whatever reason told not to do that. And we need to focus on telling that story in every way that we can. You don't need a microphone about why government matters. People are going to feel it now. We need to pick up those pieces and say, yeah, you missed your X, Y, and Z.
Can I tell a quick old guy story? Because, you know, not everybody, I mean, I don't want anybody to leave this call once they find this out about me, but as a young man in the 80s, I was a Republican. Yeah. And one of the things that used to just crack me up as a college student and then later as a professor, I was a professor for 35 years, was that students were always convinced, you know, people like in 1982, 1 million people showed up in Central Park to protest nuclear weapons. I was in New York the year after when they had another.
I was there.
Okay.
I was in high
I'm
school.
sorry to tell you that your influence on nuclear weapons policy was zero. None. In fact, Reagan thought he was being clever by proposing SDI as a way of yanking the struts out from under the nuclear freeze movement. Like it made SD, like we're still living with billions of crazy dollars being spent on this because Reagan thought it was, you know, a cool way to kind of get around the protesters. All that matters, I've worked for a mayor, a state representative, and a US senator. All that matters is the votes and the influence you're putting on the table. That's in the end, I don't care how many people show up at how many marches. It's funny that Julia and I I feel like we're being like the people who are telling you that Santa Claus never existed. Well, but it's so hard to get this across because people think that if they look, if everybody that went to a major march had to pass through a gate where they registered to vote first, like that would be cool. Like when you wed those things, like a voter registration drive, you know, to a march, or when the protest is at a town hall, right? Instead of, as Juliette said, you know, showing up in DC, that doesn't matter. Trump couldn't care less about any of that stuff. So I just, it's really important to point out that I want
to say one thing. I think we're both saying this now, right? Like, look, if your worst case scenario is he creates an economic emergency, declares, gets rid of posse comitatus, launches the military, and says there's no elections. I'm wherever you need me to be. I'm where you ever. But right. So then long, we're
into civil disobedience.
Exactly. But for us to get the democratic representation we need right now, we need Cory Booker, not because he looks great, and I'm so glad he finally, ended Strom Thurmond's record, but because lots of people were watching. He was telling the story of what it means for government to work.
So that's sort of my question for Tom, and then I want to get to some of the questions in the chat. Civic engagement, vote, elections matter. That is the message. There's no doubt. 2026, do or die, and everything leading up to that in special elections. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But having some kind, there's value, Juliette, in having, they talk about flooding the zone. The way people get their information now, is it important? It seems like it's important that they are seeing, if not crowds in the streets, and I think they probably should see crowds in the streets, but figureheads that are saying this is wrong and this is
Yeah.
right.
But it depends.
I think it has maybe to be both.
I agree with that. I'm in the arena. I'm yelling every
Right.
day. And I have a platform. But if for people who don't have platforms, right? If you once again, if you told me where do I want you to spend your time, yes, you should protest because I think it's good to know there's a community out there, right? But you also go out and get 100 people to vote between now. That if you want a goal, what's today? Today's April 1st. By July 30th. Go register 100 people.
Yeah, it's important.
There's two things about when you say you want to see people out there in the street. First, I always worry that activism takes the place of engagement.
Yeah.
And people say, well, I went to a march. What else do you want me to do? Well, that's not, I'm sorry, but that's why college kids could turn out millions of people and never have any influence.
It's a different playbook.
But the other thing is, you need to be careful when you put that many people in the street about the message they're sending, because the game of American politics now is not about your base and their base. Those are immobile groups now. It's the 5 to 10% of the normies. And this is something Rick Wilson, again, former Republican. What's our value? We knew the war plans. We were in the plan. We know, we've seen we've seen the war plans, like on Signal, and we know exactly, how these things play. Rick used to say, anybody who wants to fight Trump shouldn't say a word without thinking first, how does this play in Wisconsin? Right? It doesn't, supercharging 3 million extra voters in California is nice. And especially if there's a district you want to flip. But the fact of the matter is, every election now is about energizing or at least reassuring 200,000 people in 4 states. And I'm sorry that seems undemocratic, but that is the structure of the game right now. And so if the message of a march alienates because that can happen. Look, one of the things we know from studying, especially protests that become violent, as they consider, and I'm not saying, I'm not talking about the Women's March or any of that stuff, but for example, after the George Floyd protests, after the 68 protests, they tend to push people to the right. So you have to be careful about the message you're sending when you mobilize a lot of people, because then you can step on the message of people, that are actually trying to run for office, trying to get things done, trying to appear more moderate. I think, the food fight about Schumer, I got why Schumer did what he did. Yeah. It was bad messaging, but the right call. But do I think it's useful? I got into a huge fight. I didn't mean to, but everybody started yelling at me about, hey, AOC, who I think has been saying very sensible things, on a stage with Bernie, who I think almost never says sensible things. And we got 35,000 people. And I'm like, okay, but is that helpful? And I think that most people on this call would say, yes, it's helpful. People who have dealt with trying to win that slice of the swing would say it's not obvious when or how that's helpful. That has to be really always think about the fact that you're going to win almost any election you're going to win at the national level is going to be by 5% of people who are not engaged, who are not particularly well informed, and who it's not that they're going to switch sides. They're either going to support you or they're going to stay home.
All right. I hear what you're saying, but let me ask you something. You both stated that you're moderate conservative Democrats or independent.
I'm an independent.
Okay.
I'm moderate. I'm a little bit tougher on immigration than the rest of the party, but generally, I was a Biden person. Let's put it that way.
Okay. So, and you're talking about, questioning whether mass mobilization or the idea of protest makes sense, but we lost Roe, civil rights, money and power, well, the Dems were in power, look, what do we show up for? Is there
everything?
Right. Okay.
Everything. Look, one of the I'm sorry to jump in on this again.
Just to give Tom, because I'm reading the things. Tom is saying protest but that doesn't replace engagement. I think
Right.
everyone in the chain knows 10 people who didn't vote.
And I'm not reading the chat because I'm sure everybody's yelling at me.
No,
But
no, you're loved.
For example, you know, I thought it was impossible to overturn Roe. I just said nobody's. Remember,
That's
one of
stupid. Yeah.
one of the more apocryphal, supposedly apocryphal, but I think probably true Ronald Reagan stories is somebody said, "So are we really gonna, you know, are you really gonna push to overturn Roe?" And Reagan said something equivalent of, "Do I look that stupid?"
Right.
Like, because he just knew it wasn't going to happen. But it did happen in part because people didn't show up for off-year elections, for local elections, for congressional elections. And if you really believed that Roe was in danger, and I've had this argument with some of my Democratic friends over the year, if you really believe that Roe was in danger, you should have been busting your asses at the state level elections, because the thing that replaces Roe is action in the state legislatures.
Yeah,
And nobody
can
asks
we
people
talk
who their
about
state
that?
representative is, and they go,
Let's talk about that a little, Tom and Juliette. You know, we are a federation of 50 states, and it seems like right now the power, if there is any power to, you know, change a little bit of what's going on, is within the state. So, Tom, we were talking about this a little bit when we spoke a few weeks ago. Obviously, it begs to get more involved at the state level, make sure you're voting, and off years you're voting for your state representatives, your local representatives, but also when things, you know, I mean, it seems to me if Trump decides that he is going to take federal marshals away from the judiciary, that it's up to, you know, having people in the states who are going to say, no, you know, we're going to protect these judges at the state level. What is it we could be doing? It just goes back to the same vote.
So I mean, a couple of things. One is, you got, you know, and this is in a world in which I'm assuming that, you know, the amount of time that people spend worrying just transfer to something else. So it does turn out that showing up to community meetings is having an influence, right? This is now how the Republican Party is now seeing how wildly unpopular they are. They're not even doing them anymore. So you show up for that, because that's where, you know, someone has run for office and wants to keep their seat. You know, as I said, you get the 10 people who didn't vote to vote. We tell the story of what it means. And of course, you know, and if it's your senators or your representatives, they're responsive to those phone calls. You hear these senators say, I got 22,000 phone calls about Social Security. The rallies, not like the local rallies, whatever, you know, if you want to do them, yes. I mean, I think it's helpful to know there's a community out there, but there's other ways to get that community too. It's not either or. It's you want to do very targeted and purposeful, the purposeful things that will change both the moderates who might now realize how extreme Donald Trump's agenda is, but also just like to remind everyone, he is wildly unpopular. And you keep him unpopular by, in many ways, and I hate the way it's said, but you know, you keep him unpopular by keep saying how unpopular he is, right? I mean, in other words, this is the goal. Keep him, as he does not have a mandate. He does not, everyone knows he doesn't have a mandate except for him. And I think if we remember that, then it's like, okay, well, how do I get that extra, you know, how do I close that delta? I'm not going, the next election, I'm not going for 55%. The next election, I'm going for 50.01% and enough electoral votes to get this thing out, right? That's what you're gunning for. And there's a variety of ways to do it, but I'm all for the purposeful engagement. And right now it is between now and when the primaries are, which is less than a year from now, as we start this process. It is a great use of your time is monetary and other support to get the House back. We may not get the Senate back, but one at a time.
I think we're going
to build a bridge back to national security issues here. one of the things I think that's really important in terms of interacting with your fellow citizens here, and it's really hard to do this. It's to be the adult in the room. It's to be a little bit stoic, freaking out and screaming at people that Donald Trump is a terrible person because, he is. I think it's been really effective in some conversations I've had with people say, well, I'm not going to get into this with you about, MAGA world and, what about Biden and all that. Say, look, I care about this country and our alliances and our security as a nation.
Right.
And, and you have to do that in a way that says you are thought. I mean, I've really been surprised by how much Trump supporters want to have highly emotional charged arguments.
So
they thrive on it. But when you bring up things like national security and you do it calmly and you point out that, look, I'm sorry, I'm just, I happen to believe that Canada is our sister nation and we are part of an Atlantic family. And if you don't think that, fine, but in your heart, you're wrong. And I find that it has an effect on people to bring it to those issues instead of just saying that, Donald Trump is just douchey, which, again, is.
He is.
But his it's what he's doing and how it's affecting us. So I want to get to some of these great questions that are in the chat. And a lot of people are asking about how travel to and from the US is going to be affected and is already being affected by all of this, and questions about, are they going to be checking my phone when I re-enter the country? Juliette, can you talk to that?
Yeah, I could just talk about the rules of, okay, within the country. I mean, this is like my field. I just wrote about, let me just tell you what's about to happen. The floor is about to drop on the tourism industry. And if this was, I wrote this, it's getting edited right now. I wrote this 2 days ago. The tariffs are going to just increase it. Why would anyone spend their money here? So we're gonna feel the ripple effects of that, because that is 10% of our GDP is tourism related industries. Okay, I mean, that's big. From airlines to cruise ships to hotels to all the other things that sponsor it. So that's number one, right? So we're just going to feel that monetarily. If you are a U.S. citizen, your basic rights are this: within the continental United States, you have, and this is the rules, right? So you do not have to answer anything. You don't have to carry anything. You don't have to answer anything. And have no obligation to show a phone without probable cause, without a warrant, without you're basically under the criminal system. That is also true for lawful permanent residents. Others, it's a little bit different. Okay, so it's like there's different issues, and then the lowest would be undocumented. So it's sort of a range. But for people probably on the phone, you're going to be in the first two categories. You're fine. The border rules are very, very different. If you are a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident, you are not allowed to be denied entry into the United States, but you are expected to answer basic questions about where you were, wherever you were, and if you can refuse for your phone to be surveyed or to allow access to your phone, but that would probably give some probable cause for additional questioning. At that stage, you're going to want to call a lawyer and say no more interaction. If you have nothing to hide in this day and age, I'm kind of as I say, I choose my fights. Like, this is a fight that, I have two Y's in my last name, and I'm Lebanese, right? Like, I mean, I know what it is to be asked a lot of questions. If you are anything but that category, it is fair game. And that is what you're starting to see. So they can look in your phone, they can look in your computer, they can deny you entry even if your status is lawful coming in. So this is where we're seeing the students, and they can detain you and then have you leave. There's the other stuff that you're hearing about, the mass deportations. That's a whole different regime, but that's sort of where you are. So just choose your risk profile is what I always tell everyone. If you don't want to leave the country, don't leave the country, right? I mean, why would you ruin your vacation? I'm leaving the country all the time. I'm traveling all the time. I'm not, it is part of what I do, but also it makes me happy, and one should be able to be happy. So, so that's it. But you got to choose your risk profile. I can't choose it for you.
Okay, well, I'll get a little more specific. Let's say you're someone who comes to Big Tent Zooms, and you're
Yeah.
someone who is looking out for how we are going to make a change. And you talk about that on social media and in
Yeah.
your messaging, and you have your phone with you. Is there a recommendation on how to do that when you travel internationally? You're a US citizen, but to your point,
Oh, you're worried about what happens abroad? Like, are you
I think
surveyed
people
abroad
are
or when you
worried
come
about
back
what
in?
happens when you come back in.
If you're a US
You're an
citizen,
American citizen.
Doesn't
it's
matter.
not, I mean,
I'm
look,
asking-
they could try to make a menace of you, but, and you, I can't promise anything, but no. If you're a US citizen, no, this is, they have yet to do this on a US citizen. Everyone else
Yeah.
has a status. If they do, I will change my recommendation, but I'm not going to change for them.
Good. Let me switch focus just a little bit. There's some questions about whether people think, or whether you think that the US is going to be kicked out of or isolated from major intelligence and military alliances like Five Eyes. What's the implication of that? Do you think it's going to happen?
It endangers American service people, endangers American operations abroad. I mean, I'm sure it's happening already. I have no,
Constructively, yeah.
yeah, right. I mean, Juliette, I don't know about you. I have no inside information about this stuff. I'm very happy no longer to be a government employee with a clearance. I left that behind years ago. But I would be shocked if they're not sitting in London right now saying, you know, we don't have to tell our friends everything.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
mean,
that
and
they've just,
they've basically said Five Eyes is basically. So here's what I'm hearing, and I said this today on NPR. Like it's on, like I think on the general trend intelligence, there's still a lot of sharing, right? We're seeing ISIS regrow, and because that's. I think where you're going to see it impacted in terms of our safety, as Tom was saying, it's going to impact us, is in covert operations and special operations, because those are dependent on sources and methods. And if I am the Prime Minister of Britain, are you freaking kidding me? My intelligence agency has spent 5 years cultivating a senior leader of ISIS or whatever group in Africa or whatever a terrorist group. I am not about to give the coordinates of where that person is to Hegseth, let alone Tulsi.
oh yeah, oh Tulsi.
Yeah.
But,
So,
you know, who
so
is
that's where it's the things you're not here. I guess it's the things you don't know were happening that aren't happening. That's what I suspect is happening. Covert and special.
And you mentioned something when we spoke last time, which has really resonated, which was we're not just aligning with the bad guys now. We are the bad guys. So I'm assuming that's what our allies are thinking and seeing.
We are a de facto ally of Russia right now.
Yeah.
No tariffs for Russia.
Or Belarus.
For Russia or Belarus. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, this is Juliette made a great point earlier about in the first Trump term, you could say, like, it's a fluky outcome. You're running against Hillary. He threads the Electoral College. It's a perfect storm. The problem is the Europeans and others that are our close friends say, it's not just that Trump's capable of this. The American people are now capable of doing this twice.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's going to have a cost to our security and the thing is, they're going to share with each other.
Right.
They're just not like Juliette just said, they're not going to tell Pete Hegseth because in the words of Logan Roy, these are not serious people.
Right. So, I mean, I sort of hate to even ask this, but what does Trump have an end game? I'm specifically about our place in the world. I mean, does he want us to be the next North Korea? Are we completely self-sufficient and isolated from the rest of the world?
I don't think he has an end game. I think he ran to stay out of jail.
Yeah.
Ran to stay out of prison.
And everything's transactional. Yeah.
Everything's transactional. And now it's all about revenge. And revenge on everybody. The tariffs, the culture, the universities, the judges. Donald Trump is like an angry toddler who's now going to just throw all the food on the walls and lash out in every direction. And he's surrounded by people who themselves feel like frustrated members of the
Yes.
elite who were never allowed their moment in the sun. I mean, you have people like Stephen Miller and, like the Flight 93 guy, Michael Anton, who this dandy with came to cufflinks and, vested suits and all that stuff, who felt that they were just denied their rightful place as elites. So they're totally on board with just punishing everyone that they felt looked down on them. And that's a lot of people in this country and around the world, because a lot of people did look down on them, and for good reason.
Yeah. And the other way to think about it is like, what's the strategy of everyone else? Just remember, every single one of them wants to be JD Vance's VP pick. So if you ask me, why is Pam Bondi doing something, period, I got your answer. You ask me why Tulsi's doing something, I got your answer. Right. So, and in some ways this sounds like whatever. And like, we sound very cool. Like, I am so much happier now. It's like understanding that, because I have absolutely no expectations. And I know that sounds, but that's what it means to be, everyone wants to be engaged. That's what it means to be eyes wide open. Right.
As a friend of mine who works at a think tank said, he's like, we could have arguments about policy, but why?
Why?
It's not about policy. Nothing in this administration.
It is about,
yeah.
And that's right. It is whatever, whatever, if it's 40%, or someone told me that the dispatch people are saying 34, whatever, it is the combination of wildly unpopular, so that autocratic decisions he makes become self-defeating and therefore then make him less popular. And then can I now be the Democrat that I am? He didn't win the election, we lost it. So for all the Democrats on the phone, what Cory Booker said yesterday, not just all the greatness and all the bad stuff about Trump, is self-reflection about the party. And there's too many, I can't get into too many fights now, but if you want to tell that story of why a party or a non-party, let's just say the MAGA party, should not win, there has to be a positive messaging. And maybe it's a combination of the Toms and the Juliettes, right? Or
maybe, well, okay, but maybe should there be any effort on the left to sort of develop the equivalent to a Project 2025 for 2020?
Where is it? Project 2029.
Right? So that would be kind of helpful. Tom, you're wringing your hands, you're shaking your head.
He didn't, because he didn't win on Project 2025.
Thank you.
Yeah, but
he won. No, he won. Look, you can't beat somebody with nobody. We've got to singularly focus on elections, and then on the candidate who isn't gonna, if everything goes right, win, but it's their election to lose. I don't know who that is yet.
And stop. I will throw this out as a non-Democrat to Democrats. Stop fighting this like a bunch of policy wonks.
Yeah.
Like, oh, if only we had a better plan for reforming the federal bureaucracy. No one cares about that. Trump, the minute Project 2025 got the least bit unpopular, Trump said, never met those guys, hate them, don't know them.
They believed him.
Screw it. And everybody went, okay.
Yeah.
Look,
maybe we need more than two parties.
Well, we need,
maybe
that's not going to happen either.
No, but okay. But I've got a couple questions here I want to get to.
Okay.
Why on earth are the Republicans in Congress continuing to go along with all of this? Is it just, they're not all.
They like they like living in Washington, and they don't want to be home with their constituents. That's why.
Yeah, but as he becomes more and more unpopular, as people realize that, they cannot afford to eat or
See, you're being rational and reasonable, and that is not what this is about. They only have to survive because of and it's not because of gerrymandering, it's because of a natural sorting in this country. They only have to survive a primary.
Right.
That's it.
Well, okay, that brings me to an important question. So what are the reforms that need to happen to change our political system, to make things not happen this way?
I just don't buy that premise. I mean, in other words, as I told you, I had I'm going through my own issues. I teach at a school of public policy, as Tom says, what's the point sometimes? But I have to remind myself that in 2008, still recent memory, this country elected Barack Obama 2 times. They then followed up with Biden, who won probably because of COVID and a variety of other things. Like the idea that we need the system. Let me put it a different way. The systemic reforms are will go in our favor, I think, is a risk I don't want to take right now. Right. So I don't want to open up the Constitution. I don't want to, it is, we have won before, we will win again. If there's a question about that, the ability of us to be, to have elections, then all gloves are off, right? But and we did last night, right? We did. It's like, I mean, in other words, like there is sufficient evidence, and it is just and so I mean, if you ask me, get rid of Citizens United. It ain't going to happen. Not
Right.
now.
But it sounds, a couple of things that you guys have said tonight have made me, and maybe this is sort of a hopeful place to land, feel like, yeah, I think the center is going to hold. I think the dam's going to hold.
I didn't say that.
Well, wait, you said we're not out in the streets yet. And so far the judiciary is holding, and he hasn't, but when it does, well, then we can mass mobilize. Then we're out with our, we're
well,
strikes.
Okay. First of all, I just wrote a piece about 2 weeks ago where I
said
the judges, right? Thank you. The judges holding may not be enough anymore.
Right.
But I'm also a keep your powder dry guy, because one of the reasons Trump has always slipped by his opponents is that they turn everything to 11 right out of the gate, and it wears people out. Again, it's trying to convince other people of the threat. And I just to foot stomp Juliette's point, if 200,000 people in 4 states had made a different decision, we wouldn't be having any of this discussion.
And you wouldn't be talking about systemic reform. Like we
wouldn't be talking, we'd say the system works.
Right. And and like, if I mean, on this sort of point about sort of, the mobilization, in terms of voting is that it can be done, because it has been done. And we need to concentrate on, we can't do that without somebody, right? So that's, to me, like after the midterms, the most important thing is going to be, right, who is that somebody? And I think that I think everyone needs to, as Cory Booker said, those who are Democrats, and I know this is we have to look aside too. Most Republicans who have asked themselves about what our party is about have left the party.
Right.
Because they know that it's been hijacked. This is Tom, but about everyone, so it is thinking strategically that way. And also I want to say, because a lot of people don't like protesting, I don't want them to think on this call, I don't want them to think that they can't be effective, right?
Sure.
Like maybe their daughter's getting married on Saturday, or like whatever. Like there are a million things that we can do, everyone in the arena, and the focus is the win. This is the only thing.
That's a really good.
We lost Roe. We lost Roe. Right? And you think, oh, well, that would mobilize everyone, and he's president again, right? Like, I mean, it is.
Let me try and be a political scientist here for a minute. Go back to my old career before I did journalism.
All right, and I'm looking at we're putting up on
okay.
but go
10
ahead.
seconds.
Go ahead.
It's called post-material politics. Once a society reaches a certain level of affluence, which we have reached and surpassed, the political fights become about tiny ideological narcissism of small differences, cultural hot button issues. That person that Juliette wants to bring into the arena is going to have to be somebody who says, I am not going to service niche issues on the American left. And that's going to be really hard for a lot of Democrats to stomach, but because the Republicans don't do it, they do it by galvanizing their base. But as I keep telling people, in conditions of post-material politics, where you're not really arguing about food on the table, kitchen table issues, I'm sorry, most people have 3 televisions. The kitchen table thing of the 1970s is not the same argument that it was. And so you have to realize that in those conditions, you are a coalition up against a cult. And the coalition is a lot harder to build and keep together than a cult. All Trump has to do is say, I'm Trump, and a bunch of people come and vote.
Yes.
Right. So you're saying we need to build a coalition
Like this.
with a broad enough
Yes.
message that
Yeah.
says, hey, you know, you're not a Nazi and you're not MAGA. You're respected and welcomed within.
Exactly.
No,
That we
you
can
know,
Welcome.
It's
Well,
a big tent. Welcome. It's
didn't-
a big tent.
didn't do it and I think, you know, again, in 2024. Now, I actually thought Kamala Harris ran it. I did not want Biden to choose her as vice president because I was concerned about exactly this scenario. But I thought she ran a very good campaign in 2024. But in the end, the Democrats said, of course you're going to vote for a liberal Black woman from California. And millions of Americans went, I'm not going to do that. And, you know, we're already seeing it. I mean, this attempt, for example, by Gavin Newsom to position himself now. Gavin Newsom is not your, I mean, I'm sorry. I don't know if he's, maybe he can come out of nowhere. He's the Jimmy Carter of the next, right? You know, like Carter came out of nowhere in 76. Yeah. It could happen. But this search for magical silver bullets that are just going to end all this, I think, is really draining people's ability to focus on this struggle to just elect people.
Yeah. Not a big R, a little R.
Yeah.
Right.
Not a big R, a little R.
Guys, this is an amazing conversation. I'd like to keep
I'm
talking for the
exhausted.
next couple of hours, but it's 8 o'clock. There is no magic bullet. That's true, Kimmy.
Thank you all.
I can't thank you enough for being with us and for this amazing conversation. Yeah, lots to chew on always. I'm appreciative that you took the time to come and speak with us tonight.